Hotline, very happy to have on that bench racing hotline from speed.com. Mike Hembree joins us. Hey, Mike, how are you?
I'm great. Good to be with you guys today.
Hey, we were just talking as I got hooked up with you. It's everybody's talking up here in Toledo about it being 102, but you guys have had your share of some pretty crazy weather down there as well, haven't you?
Yeah, it's been a kind of rough summer for most of the South. We're used to hot weather in the summer here, but the temps have been sort of out of sight most of the summer, so kind of hard to deal with, but I think we'll make it through it.
Yeah, Charlie and I were talking about as these guys get ready to come up to Indianapolis, which tends to be a place that for some reason holds the heat every time we're there. And the old argument about whether race car drivers are athletes, I think when you see these guys sitting in race cars and the temperature inside those things are about 150 degrees or so, it pretty well dispels any question whether or not the athlete is there. And one of the things that you wrote about this last week was also about Denny Hamlin and the back problems that he's been suffering with again. And talk to us about the discussion you had with him about his back and whether or not that's going to be something that's going to cause him great problem as the season goes along.
Well, I think that matter is sort of open to question. He was much better last week at New Hampshire. Had no real complaints about his back. But, if you've ever had back trouble or know someone who has, it can be really good one day, and the next week you can be in the bed and virtually immobile.
Right.
A lot of the drivers who have had back issues, typically it doesn't bother them when they're in the race car because they're sort of in their environment and they're used to that sort of the pressure and the friction of all that. The problem comes when they get out and the next day they wake up and are in some pain. So I think with Hamlin it's a matter of going through the therapy and doing the right exercises and trying to keep his back as strong as he can and just hoping it doesn't flare up as much as it did over the past few weeks.
Mike, it was interesting that you wrote about this because one of the things we don't, as much coverage as there is for NASCAR, and it's like everything's covered. I mean, between Twitter and all the writers that are still on the scene, there's not that much talk about injuries, and these guys. It can't just be Hamlin. There got to be other guys that are dealing with things. How much of that is under the radar that we don't see or hear about?
Well, they like to keep that kind of stuff quiet. This is a sport that stretches from February to November, and it's tough. They're long races, they're marathons, and the top drivers don't want to be put in a position of thinking, well, you might need some help, you might need somebody else to be on standby for you. This might not be a good week for you. They want everybody to think that they can do this every week for 38 weeks out of about 40. And once any kind of rumor starts about, well, driver A might be having some difficulty with his back or he's having some leg problems and pain, etc., it doesn't take long for rumors of that sort to fly around the garage and people to start thinking, well, that spot might be open next year.
Yeah.
It's a situation where there are only, 15 or so really good rides, and people are trying to get in those spots. And if you have one of those, you try to protect it at all costs.
We're talking with Mike Hembree, and Mike, one of the things, speaking of that, so few rides. Were you surprised at what is being reported as the long list of vultures that have been circling over the 22 ride in case A.J. Allmendinger is not going to be able to hang on to that ride for this year and or be back for next year? What it's sounding like is that everybody and their uncle has been calling Penske Motorsports to see what the availability of that ride is going to be.
Yeah, I'm not really surprised by that. It happens every time a situation like this pops up. If the driver gets in some kind of trouble or as I talked about before, appears to have some kind of health issue, you're right. The line starts forming around the back corner of the garage, and the phone lines light up. The phone lines light up with a second or third level operative at one team talking to so-and-so driver who he might know from a previous relationship with another team. Word gets around quickly that a spot might be opening up, and there's not a lot of public discussion about that potential vacancy, but there's a lot going on behind the lines and between the lines about, okay, what might happen next if A happens, then B. So, yeah, a lot of talk about that sort of stuff.
Obviously, the Allmendinger deal is a big story. It has been for the last couple of weeks. Where do you see this heading? Even if his B sample comes back as being a negative, has there been irreparable harm done to A.J. Allmendinger at this point?
There's been harm done. I'm not sure if it's, as some people called it last week, a death sentence. The next test is going to be next Tuesday, and it's been my experience in these situations that it's extremely rare for the B sample to be different from the A sample. So I think we're looking at a situation where AJ is probably going to be suspended indefinitely. Then the next move belongs to Roger Penske, who's likely to keep Sam Hornish in that car as long as he can. There are going to be some conflicts with Hornish's nationwide schedule. So we're not sure what's going to happen long range there. There's the remote possibility that the test comes back negative, as you mentioned. In that case, I'm thinking AJ's back in the car as soon as that can be done. But there's always going to be a shadow, even if a shadow following him, even if that's the case. So there's not a lot of good stuff in the future, I'm afraid, for Allmendinger.
This is speculation, and I understand that as I ask you this question. Would he be able to recover enough to find a ride in another series? Would he be able to go to the Grand Am Series? Would he be able to go back to IndyCar and find something there?
I think so. The guy has some talent, and there are situations in the past, even within the Penske group, where a driver has been under some sort of problem and has come back. Castro Neves, for example, had the big tax fraud trial where he was he appeared to be in big trouble a few years ago, and the trial turned out okay, and he's back in Penske's IndyCar and has done well. So it's not impossible, but there's so many good drivers waiting on situations. Once you make a misstep, you sort of have a black mark to carry with you for a while, and it makes it tough to round the next bend.
Well, Mike, before we let you go, are you working on any new books?
No, taking a break from that for a while. Books are time consuming, and when you have another full-time job, it's tough to carve out time to do one. But I'm sure next year or two we'll be looking at coming out with something else.
All right. Well, of course, if you don't know, Mike Hembree wrote 100 Things NASCAR Fans Should Know and Do Before They Die, and not only that, but a couple others as well. Make sure you go to the usual spots. I'm sure Amazon and Barnes & Nobles if you've got a brick and mortar.
Try brick and mortar.
Brick and mortar, yeah, it's easy for me to say. Still in your area, but you can pick those up. Some great reading. And as always, Mike, thanks so much for spending time with us. We truly appreciate your insight.
I enjoyed it, guys. Thanks a lot.
All right. Take care.
Mike Hembree. That